They had traveled in a huge family, whole bunch of people traveling together. And so they probably assumed that Jesus was kind of in the back with some of his friends or whatnot. Maybe with the cousins, who knows? Well, according to Luke's account, they had gone a whole day's distance going back home before Joseph and Mary realized that Jesus actually was not there. He wasn't with the cousins. He wasn't there. Now think about that for a second, especially if you're a parent. Imagine what that must have felt like. Imagine their dismay. Imagine the panic that overcame them. Imagine that sick, disgusting feeling in the pit of their stomachs once they realized that their son, the Messiah, was missing. The scene must have been frantic as Joseph and Mary, having made their way back to Jerusalem, searched high and low, all over for Jesus, all over town, and finally, after 3 whole days of searching, the scriptures tell us that the distraught parents found their son in the temple, sitting amongst the leaders of the temple and the teachers in the temple, and he was listening to them and asking them questions. Now, as we read this passage today, somehow that whole thing doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense, especially as a parent. A child has been separated from his parents for 3 days, and this reunion in the Gospel of Luke mentions nothing about the child running into his mother's arms. It mentions nothing about the child, upon seeing his mother again, bursting into frightened tears of joy and excitement. I remember as a child being in the Jackson Mall shopping for girdles, not for me, with my mother and my grandmother, and I decided to go somewhere else and was lost within the Jackson Mall. I got picked up by a security guy and stuck in an office, and then they paged my mother. And when she finally found me, I was delirious. I was okay, I think, before I saw my mother's face. But I did. I burst into tears, and I ran into her arms, and she hugged me, and she hugged me, and she hugged me. And then she told me to never do that again. Don't ever walk away from me again. Jesus doesn't do any of that. Jesus, on the other hand, is calmly hanging out in the temple with the teachers. Not only that, verse 47 tells us that all who heard Jesus, as he was asking questions, all those people were amazed at his understanding of the scripture and the answers that he was giving them. Even the men in the temple did not express relief when the boy's parents showed up. Those guys didn't realize that Jesus was lost. They seemed to be just as oblivious to any problems as Jesus was. Jesus wasn't worried. It was almost as if Jesus wasn't even lost in the first place. Mary, the mother of Jesus, is the first person in this part of the narrative to react the way the rest of us would have. Verse 48 says, "Child, why have you treated us like this? Look, your father and I have been searching for you in great anxiety." This is definitely one of those situations where the translated text appears not quite strong enough at best. Anthropological truths allow us to understand that what Mary really said probably went something like this: "Jesus, just what in the world do you think you're doing? Your father and I have been worried sick. Do you have any idea how long we've been looking for you? We were on the way home, and now you go and pull a stunt like this. You've got some serious explaining to do, Jesus." I feel better having just said that. Luke's account about the boy Jesus in the temple intentionally mirrors the Old Testament account of Samuel, if you remember Samuel from the Old Testament, being given to God to live in the temple. The lives of Samuel and Jesus are very carefully paralleled by Luke to help us understand who Jesus was and who he would eventually become. Samuel was given to Eli at birth. to live in the temple, and here is Jesus, 12 years old, but in the temple. From the prophecies of his arrival to the virgin birth to a 12-year-old Jesus growing up as a bona fide Hebrew, attending all the Jewish festivals, having a bar mitzvah, now getting lost in the temple, Luke is making sure that his readers, that you and I, in no way doubt the authenticity of who Jesus Christ is. Like we said, Samuel's ministry began as a child in the temple with the priest Eli. And now, in Luke, right after being lashed by his mother's tongue, Jesus reveals to his parents and to the temple officials and to us who he truly was and who he truly is. And in verse 49, Jesus said to them, "Why were you searching for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house? I must be in my Father's house." He wasn't lost at all. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. And he didn't understand what the big deal was. We do. We know what the big deal was. Jesus said, "I must be here." But what Mary was saying was, "I must take care of you. I must search for you. I must provide for you. I must nurture you. I must clothe you. I must feed you." And Jesus says, "I must be in my Father's house." What's the big deal? The two musts don't go together, if you will. And that's hard for us to understand. It's hard for us to put on our Dr. Phil hat and try to figure out this family dynamic because it doesn't make sense. Jesus is the Son of God, but he's also the son of Mary. Mary is Jesus' mother, and Mary and Joseph have a responsibility for the boy. But Jesus is in his Father's house. He must be there, even though they must take care of him. What are the things in your life that you must do? What must you do? Things that must be done. And think about that. How do they jive with the things that God must do for us? It is true that Mary's anxiety and anger came from a mother's instinct. But it's also important for us to remember, verse 50, that they didn't understand what he had said to them. They didn't understand what he had said to them. You must be here? No, you should be with us.